says to each of you, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light.
Go and stand and sing with us.
All
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this worship and just really reminding us of truth. And God, that you are everything, that you breathe life and that power that you bring just with your breath. That's all we need, right there. You breathe life into us. And that power you hold, God, that as your sons and daughters, that is with us. And that's what I was just thinking when that worship song was playing. It's just, God, how powerful you are and how wonderful and how, as your sons and daughters, that resides with us, with your spirit with us. And in the beginning it says, we're all, your whole Godhead was there present, Spirit, Son, and Father. And God, I'm just so thankful for that. And that you are constantly pursuing us, and that your power, and you just want to be with us. And just very thankful for that this morning. Father, I ask that as we are diving into Hebrews, I pray that you would just, your spirit would just stir our hearts and our souls for your word, and just create a hunger and a desire to draw near to you and just really reflect on what's going on in our lives and how we can apply what's going on in Hebrews into our lives, and just taking it out and just really bringing it into the situations and relationships that you have us in right now. And I just ask, Father, that you would be with us, and that most and foremost, that you would be glorified through this time that we have together as a community, but also as we go out throughout the week, that, Father, you would just be glorified. Pray this all in your glorious name. Amen.
Today's reading comes from Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. It says this: Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses also was faithful in all God's house. For Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant, to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ is faithful over God's house as a son. And we are his house, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope. This is the word of the Lord.
How is your hope this afternoon? How's your hope? Sorry, guys. It's working. It's me, not our amazing sound team. Round of applause. We got some people shadowing back there. Just testing you guys. You did great. How is your hope today? If you thought about the amount of hope in your life today, not last week, not where you think you might be in a couple days or a couple weeks. Right now, if you thought about it as a tank, how full would your hope tank be? Would it be overflowing with hope? Just you couldn't keep it all in there? Or would it be kind of somewhere in the middle, which maybe you just would consider an average amount of hope? Or would it maybe be very low or almost near empty? The reality is, each and every day there are things that, can fly through our lives that can put a hole in our tank of hope and allow hope to just kind of slowly but surely leak out. And hope is something that, as you look at the Bible, you begin to see it's something that God, that the work of the Son, is very concerned about. Hope is something that God really, really wants for you to have. A real solid, sure, steadfast hope. And, as we've been looking at, we're in Hebrews 3 today, and we've been in this series through Hebrews called Consider Jesus. And if you remember, the group of people that this was originally written to was most likely a very small house church in Italy, just a few decades after the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And at that time, there was a lot of reasons for this little house church of believers to begin doubting if following Jesus was worth it, if he was actually even real, and if what he had done even really mattered. Because they began to look around and they thought, there's just a handful of us in this house. There's so many people out there that the cultural tide of the time was antagonistic towards this new faith that had grown out of Judaism. And there was increasing threats of persecution. And so they were having to really seriously consider, am I willing to die for this? Do I really believe that this is so true and real that I would lose my life over it? They're battling with hope. Now, you and I aren't necessarily facing that level of threat of persecution. But nevertheless, we're facing things that can hit our hope tank and start to make it leak a little bit. And as we'll see here in this first section of Hebrews 3, there's a direct connection between Jesus and hope. It's something that we all long for. It's something that we are all consciously and subconsciously working to get a grasp on. And as we will see, really the only true source of hope is Christ. And this is what the writer of Hebrews is bringing us back to once again. When life gets difficult, when you start to wonder, is this worth it? Is this real? Can I continue swimming upstream against the culture or against my own flesh or anything? Consider Jesus. Look much more closely at Jesus. If you've been here for the last 2 weeks, that's not really going to sound that different. Basically, the first 3 chapters of the book kind of just say the same thing in a couple of different ways, which is pay even closer attention to Jesus. But we see here there's a few kind of layers added to it of the importance of considering Christ. And here we're going to see that it is really tied to hope. That's what's at risk. If you lose crystal clear focus on Christ, you risk losing your grasp on hope. So we're going to look at these 6 verses in 3 different movements. And the first is the call to hope. The second is the distraction from hope. And the third is the way to hope. So the call, the distraction, and the way to hope. I actually want us to start at the very end of this section as we think about the call to hope. And we're going to kind of actually walk backwards through this passage. So look with me all the way at the very bottom to verse 6. In the second part, where it begins with end. And we are his house, speaking of Christ, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope. So there's this calling to the followers of Christ throughout all times to hold fast to their hope, to hold fast to their confidence and boasting in their hope, which I think, assumes a couple of things. The first is that it's going to be difficult to maintain hope in our lives. And hope, if you look at how it's used in the New Testament, and it's pretty close to how we use it now, with kind of with deeper roots in it. But it's the idea that you expect good. That as you look out into your future, you expect good. You expect good things to happen. You expect good from God. But, obviously, this is assumed here, but it's assumed that that's not necessarily easy. To every single day, to expect good, and to expect good from God. So we're called to hold fast to it. It's so easy for even little things, like just little pebbles thrown at, your hope tank. I mean, there can be, massive, boulders that come through and just demolish it. It takes a while to rebuild it. But those things over time, those attacks on your ability to believe that good can happen, that you can expect good, over time can make you cynical and make you begin to really doubt that anything good, really good, might be able to happen in the future of your life. I'm not immune to this. This is because it's a human experience. It's a human experience to battle with when I think about my future and about, the quality of my life, the quality of my relationships, the quality of, everything I'll experience. It's easy to think, well, I don't want to get, caught off guard again because X, Y, and Z has happened in my past. That's actually, told me that, well, maybe I can't expect good. And it's easy to become hardened. And so when we do that, we're losing grip on hope. We're letting it go. And the writer of Hebrews is calling you and is calling me to hold fast to hope, even when it's difficult. So it's assumed that it will be difficult, but here's the hopeful thing about hope. It also assumes that it's possible. It's calling us to hold fast to our confidence and our hope. There's an assumption there that even in the crazy storms that are life and that are your life, it is actually possible to have hope and to be a hopeful person. Even though, you will get pelted along the way and have many reasons to become hardened and cynical and lose hold on hope. Hope is it's like a rescue buoy. The kind that, like a lifeguard has. That's, when you get into trouble, they can swim out into the ocean, or I guess they have them in pools. I don't know. Maybe they just have the little ones that swim out. I'm thinking of oceans, right? Where they have one you can run, and they can go out and they can swim with it, so it carries them along, and then they can come to you and then carry you safely back to shore. Hope is like that in life, you're kind of constantly getting pushed down from different angles, right? Kind of from every angle. Financially, or relationally, or, with work, school, whatever. There's something always kind of pressing you, putting your head beneath the water, so to speak. And hope, the ability to expect good and to expect good from God, is what gives you like buoyancy. That it'll kind of stay afloat. That even when the waves come and the tides, do crazy things, that you're able to stay on top. You're not, you may dip down for a second, but you're going to shoot right back up. Because the idea with something that's buoyant is that it weighs less than the water that it displaces. And so there's actually kind of an upward energy from the water that pushes it up and keeps it up. I don't know about you, and when you think about your life right now, and where your level of buoyancy is at. How far your head is underwater, or maybe how high above the water is. Or maybe it's just kind of right at that level where it's just, you can breathe and you're good, but you're kind of just treading water. Wherever you are in that, Jesus wants to be there for you. He wants to do something in the midst of that for you, to give you even more buoyancy, to help you float along in the difficulties and the storms of life. Well, that brings me to the second section. So not only the call to hope, but also the distraction from hope. Now this is where we begin to get a little bit more into some of the unique angles that Hebrews 3 is giving us on hope and on considering Jesus. When it was read, you heard the name Moses pop up quite a few times. Moses is, if you look back at the Old Testament, he's kind of the best of the best. Moses is like the hero of all heroes. He was, at this time, especially if you're a Christian, maybe you grew up in the church, you might think Moses is great. None of us are like struggling with idolatry to Moses. But at this time, this was a hot guy. This was a guy that, he's coming out of Judaism into becoming Christians. They're like, man, Jesus is great, but Moses, man, he was awesome. And they really wrestled with this, of almost like reverting back to having more faith in Moses than faith in Christ. And so the writer of Hebrews, just, very near the beginning of his letter to them, once again is kind of, taking a shot at the things that they took confidence in. Now, he very clearly affirms Moses. He says things like, Moses was faithful in all God's house. He is counted of glory, and he was a faithful servant in God's house. So there's nothing wrong with Moses. He's great. He's not demeaning Moses, but he's saying there's someone greater. And one thing that's always bothered me about reading about the story of Moses in Genesis is the fact that throughout the first 5 books of the Bible is that he did this. He was amazing, right? He led Israel out of slavery in Egypt, led them through a parted sea, and then he was responsible for being the one who would speak face to face with God, receive the Ten Commandments written with the finger of God on tablets of stone, and he was leading them not only out of slavery through the wilderness, but ultimately into the Promised Land. And then he doesn't get to go into the Promised Land. God forbids him because he disobeyed God with a very small thing. He struck the rock when they were looking for water, when he wasn't supposed to. He was just supposed to speak to the rock. A small thing, and God says, because of that, you don't get to go into the Promised Land. Someone else will lead them there, and you won't get to see it. And that's always bothered me because it's like, I think he deserved it. He did a lot. He took, if you look at it, Israel's constantly grumbling and, complaining, and he's putting up with it, and he's being faithful, and then he doesn't get to go. I think that that's very purposeful because Moses is great, but he can't take you all the way. He can't get you into the Promised Land. It's, even in the narrative of the Old Testament, it's opening up your and my imagination for one who will come, who's like Moses, who's faithful, who leads us out of slavery, through the wilderness of our life, and ultimately into the Promised Land. The stone tablets that the Ten Commandments were written on aren't very buoyant. Rocks don't do a good job of serving as floats. And yet, there is something in us, and we've talked about this the first couple chapters of Hebrews, and we'll continue to see this throughout the book. There's something in us that wants to rely on ourselves, right? That's kind of the negative underside of Moses, representing the law, representing the one who brought the Ten Commandments, is that it can, without Christ, we look at that and think, it's just up to me to justify myself. It's up to me to pass inspection. And for some of you, you might feel like you're doing a pretty good job. You're like, I'm amazing. I'm holding 2 stone tablets and treading water. That's only going to last for so long. Or you might be thinking, I am holding onto those stone tablets and I'm drowning. Because you're relying on yourself. Now, to go a little bit broader, it's not mentioned here, but I think we can infer this, that even broader than just kind of obedience to God and trying to make yourself right for Him and what you can do is, I think we reach for a lot of things to be our buoy, right? We reach for a lot of things to keep us afloat. And oftentimes it is specific religious kind of obedience, but I think that also speaks to just a bigger problem in every human heart, which is that we will look for anything to justify us. You can look to a person. You can look to your money. You can look to your education. You can look to your accomplishments. You can look to your personality. Every one of those things, ultimately, over time, you will find, and I'm sure you found already some of them, that they don't end up, they're more like rocks than they are rescue buoys. They don't end up keeping you afloat. You end up having to work really hard, like a duck, looks all calm on the top, but you're underneath and your legs are spinning. You're barely keeping it together. If you go the Moses route, and that trail is what you follow to have hope. You might be able to taste a little bit of it, but ultimately it's going to fall through your hands. So that's the distraction. That's the distraction from hope. We're shifting to the third section, the way to hope. So we've kind of walked backwards, started at the very end, this call to hold fast to our confidence and boasting in our hope. We've seen this comparison between Jesus and Moses, specifically that Moses is great, but he's not great enough. And then I want to take us to the very first verse of chapter 3, where it says this: "Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful to Him who appointed him." Consider Jesus. That word comes from two words that literally mean look down into. Look down into Jesus. Again, the writer of Hebrews is just saying, look, you are struggling to this, right to this house church. You're struggling, you're wrestling with, is following Jesus worth it? Is this enough? Is He worthy? Do I want to do this? Is it worth it? And once again, he says, look down into Jesus. Moses was great. He prepared the way. Much like many of the other people we meet throughout the Old Testament. But consider Jesus. Once again, you and I are being not only invited, but actually commanded here. This is actually commanded for you and I to look down into Christ. To look Him up and down, so to speak. To put together the pieces of His life, His death, and resurrection, and what that actually means for you. So, please, your grandma's faith is amazing, right? Everybody's grandma is amazing. And like 99% of them are just amazing followers of Jesus. No, don't only follow your grandma's faith. And don't only, just say, well, my grandma rejected it, so that's just what my family does, and I'm going to reject it too. For you, personally, consider Jesus. Don't rely on your grandma. Now, I want us to peer through the window of two interactions that Jesus has with two of His disciples. As they do this, as they consider Jesus, to see what does this look like? And how can you and I do this? And what's the benefit? Considering Jesus. So the first one is Peter. Peter was one of Jesus' disciples, and he's kind of infamous for being a great encouragement to us because of how often he got it wrong. And how often Jesus was patient to bring him along. And they've been doing, this is in Matthew 14, they've been doing, Jesus and his disciples have been doing a ton of ministry, and he'd been, preaching and healing people, and they get to a town, and Jesus gets away to go up on a mountain and pray by himself. And he stays up there all day, and it turned into night. At this point, the disciples had gotten on their boat, and they were on the sea that was next to this mountain. And it was in the middle of the night. We're told that it was in the fourth watch of the night, which means between like 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So it's late, and it's dark, and it's stormy. There's a massive storm going on. And the disciples are on a boat, and they start to, obviously, for good reason, be afraid. And Jesus actually is up on this mountain praying, and he sees all this happening, so he comes down, and he ends up, if you're familiar with the story, he ends up walking on the water, and he walks towards them, and at first they think he's a ghost, because it's a storm, and it's dark, and he's walking on water. And so they think he's a ghost. And then he talks to Peter. And he says, Peter says to him, he's questioning him, is this you, Lord? And he says, come. He invites him to walk out onto the water. And Peter does. And it says he's walking on water. He's walking towards Jesus. And apparently he gets very close to him because it says, but then he saw the wind. So up until that point, we're assuming that Peter didn't see anything except for Christ. He's looking straight ahead of Christ. And as he's looking straight ahead of Christ, he is able to walk across the water. He is floating on top of the water. There's a storm going around him. He's defying all physics and all science and everything. And he's walking across the water. But then he noticed the wind. And it says he began sinking. But as soon as he stopped considering Jesus, as soon as he stopped looking intently at Christ, then he began to sink. Now, the encouraging thing is Jesus, it says he was right there, he reached down and he pulled him up, right? So this is going to happen to you and I, right? We're looking at Christ, and then we see the wind, we see the storm, and then we start to sink, and then he picks you up. He says, okay, now look at me again. Don't look down at yourself. Don't look at your circumstances. Just look at me. That's one window into one of the disciples considering Jesus. Another window, and I love this one so much because it's so real. It's just so real. After Jesus had been crucified and he'd been raised from the dead, he went around and he was showing up to people, showing up to his disciples, showing up to people who knew him, showing up to people who didn't know him, who just heard about him. And people are, catching wind of this Jesus who's been, claiming to be God and doing miracles and saying he's going to save people from their sins and all this stuff. He got killed, and here he is. He's back from the dead. And so his disciples are hiding away in a house because, word has gotten out about this, and they're fearing for their life from the Israelite leaders at the time. And Jesus shows up in the house, actually passes through the wall, and which tells us something about our resurrected bodies, because he had a real body, but he was also able to pass through walls. I don't fully understand it, but it's amazing. Passes through this wall, he goes into the house, and shows himself to his disciples. But one of the disciples wasn't there, and that was Thomas. And Jesus leaves, and the disciples find Thomas the next day, and they tell him that Jesus was here. He was physically here. And Thomas says, basically, I'll believe it when I see him. He doubted. He did not think that Jesus had raised from the dead. He thought he was still in his grave. He wasn't believing this. And it says that 8 days later, Thomas was at the house with the disciples, and Jesus shows up again. And let me read this to you from John 10:27. I'm sorry, 20:27. Then he said to Thomas, this is Jesus to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Jesus doesn't scold Thomas. He doesn't start going on a rant about, after everything I've done for you, he pulls back his cloak and he says, put your hand in my side. After he's shown him his hands, he said, put your hand in my side. And before Thomas even did that, he said, my Lord and my God. It was when he considered Christ as he was, as he presented himself to be. Now, Jesus goes on to say, blessed are you for believing, but blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe, right? Because you and I, we don't have that luxury to see Jesus in the flesh and to have him say, put your hand in my side. But what we do have is his very spirit, which he says is actually better. It's actually better that he go away in the flesh and that he send his spirit. And he says the same thing to you. Come, put your hand in my side. See where I went for you. See that you can expect good from God. He had the sun completely extinguished on him so that the sun could rise for you. He went through the depths of being completely God-forsaken so that you would never have to taste that. He took the bad future that should have been yours and gave you his good future. Your future is incredibly bright because Jesus' was made incredibly dark, completely dark. And so Jesus says, consider me. Put your hand in my side. You can, it doesn't matter if there's wind. It doesn't matter if there's waves, if it's the middle of the night. You can expect good from me because look where I went for you. If I went there for you, what more would he not do? What would he not do for you? The resurrected Christ saying to each and every one of us, who is post-death, consider me. Which is exactly what Jesus does invite you and I to do each and every time we come to his table. He, in a way, is saying, come, Thomas. Put your hand in my side. He really wants us to remember that he had his body ripped and shredded into pieces and his blood poured out so that you would never have to have that done to you. So you would never have to even come close to that. He wants you to remember that. So that's what we're going to do in just a moment, is remember Christ. To, like Thomas, put our hand in his side. To look down into him as our only source of what can tell us that we have a good future, an incredibly bright future. And if you're here and you don't know Christ, you don't identify as a follower of Jesus, I want to say to you, I'm so glad you came. Thank you for coming. I hope that you will come again. But during this time, this is something that we do as followers of Christ, where it's something very special, meaningful between us and him together. And so during this time, would invite you to participate, but not by going back to other tables, but participate by considering Jesus. By thinking about the verses that have been read and the things that have been said. Maybe God might be speaking something to you. And if you're here and you have placed your faith in Jesus, and you believe that it's only by his broken body and his shed blood that you have any possible chance of not only being reconciled with God, but by having hope that can outlast death, then you are invited to spend this time with Jesus, remembering and celebrating what he's done for you. So if you're in a place where your hope tank needs a little bit of refilling, let this be a moment of refilling for you. That you can expect good from your Heavenly Father. So, when you're ready, I would invite you to go back to one of these tables in the back. And we have two ways you can engage with this time. You can engage and participate with the prepackaged elements, or if you'd like to, we also have bread and the cup. And if you do that, you simply take the bread, dip it in the cup. And you can bring it back to your chair. You can spend a few moments in the back, just kind of by yourself, whatever you'd like to do to spend this time with Jesus. So when you're ready, I invite you to feast on Christ in your hearts by faith and be thankful.
we are very glad that you have joined us to worship today. Especially if it is your first time, we just want to say welcome. We hope that you have enjoyed your time and felt welcomed by one another. We know it can be hard to visit a new church, so if you could take a worship guide and fill out the connection card so that we can reach out and talk to you some more, get you connected. But also, you go to the table in the lobby area and give us the connection card, and we'll give you a free t-shirt. So t-shirts are nice. It's actually this t-shirt, and it's really soft, so I'm a big fan. Also, if you are new around here, and maybe you aren't a believer, and you're looking for something to kind of ask life's big questions, this week on Tuesday, Alpha starts, which is a place that you can come and talk. Every week we will present the Christian perspective, but we welcome all sorts of worldviews. It's really supposed to be a safe place that you can talk and get to know each other and hang out. I mean, that's always fun. One of the things that we really want to do as the church here at Antioch is to be a praying church. And so there's two things that are coming up that are part of that aim. This Saturday, just like the first Saturday of every month, we have our city prayer walk. So that's going to be this Saturday at Railroad Park. You'll be able to gather together, to pray together, to pray for our city, to pray for UAB, and also, if the opportunity arises, maybe get to pray with people there in the park. But coming up, we also have our week of prayer. So it's not this week, but it's the next week, and it's at Third Pres, so we're going back to some early mornings there at Third Pres. So we look forward to just joining together to pray. I know for me it's been just such a good rhythm to be there, to be with the body, and to really get ready for another semester. So I would invite you to do that. Another thing that we do here at Antioch is we like to get together and eat and hang out and read the Bible. So families are happening right now. You can find information in the worship guide, but you can also go to our website. There's pretty much every night of the week, there's somewhere you can be to gather together. And now we're going to continue in worship through giving. So there'll be a number on the screen, / in your worship guide. You can find all the information to give. It's really a time of worship to the Lord who has blessed us, who sustains us. So I would invite you to worship in that way.
Wanted to share something, just a little update about our worship team, because as you know, we have had our interim team leading us, which, let's just give them a round. So this has been Sarah Carter and then Andrew Jessel as well, stepping in to do this. And I guess this is what happens whenever you do a really good job at something. You get asked to just keep doing it. And so, yeah, so we have processed through this as a team, and just to kind of give you guys an update, we are moving forward with transitioning kind of how we lead our worship ministry. So instead of having a new Sarai in that one role who kind of does everything, we are going to have a shared team approach. And so it will continue. For now, that team is going to continue being Sarah, Andrew, and Carter. And then Sarai actually will be stepping back into that team as well. So just wanted to give you guys a little update on that. Make sure to say thank you to the team that's been leading and that is going to keep leading. So yeah, so thank you.
So one of the things that we do to close out every service is to sing doxology, and it just really helps, like, reinforce who we're doing this for. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above.
receive this benediction as we go now from the very end of Revelation. Chapter 21, as John describes the vision that he has of the very end of time. Said he heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away."